Off the bird. Step back, ma'am. This last seat is for people who matter, not paperwork. The Chinook sat at flat pitch on the pad, rotors turning, tail ramped down, and grinding heat into the line of people waiting to leave. 0600 had come and gone. It was past noon now, past 1300 hours, and the light stood up off the matting like a wall. 41 souls, 39 seats. The tree line lay 800 meters past the wire, dark and patient in the shimmer, and the wind carried grit and jet fuel and the sour smell of a base being abandoned. This was the last aircraft out of a country that had stopped belonging to anyone. The woman he pulled out of the chalk wore a plain travel jacket, one canvas bag over her shoulder, and a gate-issued evacuee badge with no rank and no name that meant anything to him. Major Cole Dietrich had her by the sleeve. 2 steps. She led him. She did not brace, did not jerk her arm back, did not raise her voice. She simply moved where the hand moved her, the way a person moves who has decided the fight is not here. Her eyes never went to Dietrich. They went to the rotor disc, then the load ramp, then the tree line, cataloging. She counted heads against seats in one pass. She saw what he did not, that the aircraft already sat near its maximum gross weight for the field elevation and the heat, that the numbers he had crammed onto his clipboard were wrong in a way that would bite him at the worst possible second. 3 feet into a hover. She said 2 words. "Understood, Major." That was all. She turned away from him. She did not stand there being insulted. She went and did his job, and did it better than he was doing it. She found a mother with 2 small children stranded in the sun, and walked them out of it toward the ramp, 1 child on each side, her canvas bag pushed around behind her back so it would not swing into them. She waved a limping soldier ahead of herself, put a hand flat between his shoulder blades, steadied him up onto the matting. Then she set herself down at the corner of the crowd, back to the aircraft, 1 pace inside the arc of the tail rotor, the exact spot a crew chief would want a calm body standing, the spot that keeps a panicked civilian from walking backward into a spinning blade. She did it without being told. She did it like breathing. On the ramp, Sergeant First Class Gideon Traeger watched her do it. He was 44 years old and had loaded more aircraft than he could count, in more bad places than he wanted to remember, and he knew what it looked like when someone belonged near a helicopter and when someone did not. This woman belonged. She had read the tail rotor before she got near it. She had triaged the children forward without a word. She stood square to the crowd and let the aircraft sit at her back, trusting it, the way you only trust a thing you have flown or fixed or bled next to. Traeger keyed nothing. He said it low, to the loadmaster beside him, almost to himself. Civilian, huh? He did not buy it. Not for 1 second. Dietrich, meanwhile, was pleased with himself. He waved the clipboard like a baton and called forward a broad-shouldered man in a contractor's vest, a rider who had coordinated with him earlier, quietly, off to the side, the way things got coordinated on Dietrich's flight line. The man climbed the ramp and took the seat. Her seat. The one struck through with a single pen line beside a name Dietrich had not bothered to read. At the manifest table, Specialist Denny Fulmer, 20 years old, held the boarding roster and felt something turn over in his stomach. He had watched the major pull a quiet woman out of a legitimate slot and hand her place to a man who had shaken his hand behind the fuel bladders an hour ago. Fulmer's pen hovered. He looked at the struck name. He looked at the woman standing calm inside the rotor wash. He said nothing. He was 20, and the major outranked him by 4 grades, and saying nothing felt like the only door that was open. So the line moved. The favored rider buckled in. The children Ashford had walked out of the sun, waited for the next bird that everyone swore was coming, and the woman with the canvas bag stood in the heat, and the noise and the blowing grit, moving other people toward the seats she had just been denied, her eyes tracking the wire and the tree line, and the long, dark edge of the trees where the wind came from. There was a language in the way she carried herself that most of the men on that pad had never learned to read. She did not fidget. She did not check her watch or crane her neck toward the horizon the way frightened people do. She stood the way a sentry stands, weight even, hands loose, chin level, and she let the aircraft breathe at her back while her eyes did the only work that mattered. A soldier ran past her toward the ramp and clipped her shoulder and did not apologize, and she did not so much as sway. She simply reset her feet and kept counting, and the counting never stopped. Seats against souls, souls against seats, the arithmetic running behind her eyes like a current under ice. Traeger leaned off the ramp on his gunner's belt and could not stop watching her. He had a feeling, cold and certain, that the most dangerous thing on this pad was not the enemy past the wire. It was the quiet woman none of them had bothered to name. The first Chinook lifted at last, nose down, dust boiling off the matting in a brown wall that swallowed the crowd for 10 full seconds. When it cleared, the pad reset for the final lift, and the trouble started before the second aircraft was even fully spun. The Chinook showing marginal power. That was the word coming off the flight deck. Marginal. The density altitude was punishing. The field sat high, and the afternoon sat hot. And with the load Dietrich had crammed aboard, the pilots were not sure they could pull the aircraft into a hover, let alone out of ground effect and over the wire. The flight engineer and the 2 pilots went back and forth on the internal net. Numbers, torque values, temperature. Dietrich pushed into the middle of it, out of his depth and unwilling to show it, insisting the manifest was the manifest, and the aircraft would fly what he put on it. Ashford was still behind the line, still the civilian. She had heard enough of it drifting off the ramp to know exactly where the argument was stuck. She stepped close to Traeger, not to Dietrich, and spoke quietly under the rotor noise, so only he caught it. "You're about 400 over for this elevation. Pull the 2 pallets nobody will die without, and you'll fly." She said it the way a person says a thing they have said 1,000 times. Correct terms, no hesitation, no showing off. Over max gross. This elevation. She named which non-essential load to strip. The 2 pallets of comfort supplies lashed at the aft edge, 400 pounds that bought Dietrich nothing but a good line on his paperwork. Traeger checked it. He walked it to the flight deck, ran it against the performance card himself, and came back staring at her differently than he had 10 minutes before. She was right. Not close. Right to the decimal. The moment the 2 pallets came off and hit the matting, the aircraft settled into its numbers, like a horse that had finally been given its head, torque dropping into the green, the pilots' voices easing on the net. Traeger came back down the ramp and stopped in front of her. "Where'd you learn weight and balance, ma'am?" "Around." She deflected it the way she deflected everything, without heat, her eyes already gone from him and back to the tree line. And while every soldier on that pad was staring at the aircraft, at the pallets, at the argument, Ashford was watching the one thing none of them were. A dust plume had risen off the approach road, low and thin, a mile out and closing. She timed it against the wind. She did the arithmetic of it. Then she said it to Traeger, flatly, before the tower ever called it. "Vehicle, approach road, past the wire, coming in, 2 minutes." Traeger turned, found it, and felt the hair go up on his arms. The tower called the same plume 9 seconds later. She had seen it first. She had seen it while the rest of them looked the wrong way, and she had seen it because her eyes had never left the ground the men were ignoring. It was the 3rd time now that her eyes had gone to the ground the men ignored, and Traeger had begun to keep a private tally of it. Once at the tree line, once at the wire, where a section of concertina had been cut and folded back for the last convoy and never rewired. Once at the low dust of the approach road. She read terrain the way he read a fuel gauge, without drama, without pointing, filing each thing into a picture only she could see. She never once looked at the men who had laughed at her, not to answer them, not to shame them, not even to measure them. They were not a threat, so they did not rate her attention, and there was something almost unbearable in how completely she had decided that. Dietrich came back around the tail then, and he did not like what he saw. A civilian woman standing at his crew chief's elbow, talking to his crew, being listened to. It scratched at the one thing he could not stand to have scratched, which was the sense that he was the center of his own flight line. He put himself between her and Traeger. "You're behind the line," he said. "Behind the line means behind the line. Let my people do their jobs." Ashford looked at him for exactly as long as it took to be finished looking at him. Then she went. She stepped back to where the line said she should stand, unhurried, and set herself down again at the corner of the crowd, one pace inside the tail rotor arc, back to the aircraft, eyes on the wire. Traeger watched her go, and he marked where she stood. The way you mark the position of the one person on a bad night you already know you are going to want to find in a hurry. The vehicle turned out to be nothing. A late fuel truck waved through, no threat behind it. But the point had been made, and only 2 men on the pad understood what it was. The woman Dietrich had thrown out of line had just done the math the major could not do, called the road before the tower, and read the aircraft better than the crew flying it. She had done all of it from behind a line, in civilian clothes, with a canvas bag at her feet, and no rank on her chest. And Traeger stood on his ramp and thought, that is not a passenger. That is somebody who used to own the whole pad. With the first bird gone and the second not yet loaded, the mood on the ground shifted the way it does when men are frightened and pretending they are not. Waiting is the hardest part of any evacuation, and Dietrich knew it, and he did what small men do with a frightened crowd. He found someone to make the joke about, so the fear had somewhere to go that was not him. He picked the woman with the canvas bag. "Watch and learn," he told the cluster of junior soldiers near the manifest table, loud enough to carry, tipping his chin at her. "The clipboard lady's going to organize us to death. She ran my flight line for about a minute back there. Real expert." A couple of his people laughed, because the major was laughing, and because laughing was easier than standing in the heat being afraid. A nickname started, the way nicknames start, the clipboard lady, passed hand to hand, a small, cruel coin. One soldier nudged her canvas bag aside with the toe of his boot. Not hard, just enough to say it out loud with his body. "You are furniture here." Ashford did not rise to any of it. Her face did not change. She reached down, picked up the bag, set it back where she wanted it, and did the only thing she had done all day, which was work. She pulled a poncho liner and 2 tent stakes from the load debris, and rigged a low sunshade over the mother and the 2 children, anchoring it against the rotor wash so it would not lift. She walked the fuel line and gently herded 3 panicked evacuees off the hazard, back from the bladders, without raising her voice. She found a cargo strap a young soldier had rigged backward, the buckle loading against the weave, the kind of mistake that lets a pallet walk in flight, and she fixed it, cinched it correct, and moved on before he even understood. It had been wrong. And she wrote. Not a diary, not complaints. A small waterproof notebook came out of the jacket pocket, and into it went times, seat numbers, names, tail numbers. The Surak name and the man who took the seat, the 2 pallets, and when they came off. The doctored count she could already feel coming. She wrote the way an investigator writes, or a pilot fills a logbook, because the record is the record, and the record outlives the noise. She crouched by the smallest child, a girl of maybe 6 with her fists knotted in her mother's sleeve, and spoke low, under the laughter, meant for no one but the girl. "Hey, you're on the next one. I'll walk you to it myself." The child believed her, because there was nothing in the woman's voice that a child mistrusts. She stopped crying. That was the only audience Ashford played to all day, and the child never knew she had been spoken to by the most decorated soldier on the base. A cluster of Dietrich's junior soldiers drifted closer to the joke, the way people drift toward a fire, and one of them tried a line of his own, louder than the rest, a crack about the lady inspecting his cargo straps. He wanted the major's laugh. He got it. Ashford, 3 steps away, finished cinching the strap he had rigged backward, tugged it twice to seat the buckle, and moved on to the next thing without ever turning her head. She had heard him. She had simply decided he did not exist in the only ledger she was keeping, which was the ledger of who got on the aircraft and in what order. The soldier's grin faltered a little when he realized the strap he had been mocked over had, in fact, been rigged wrong, and that the woman had fixed it, and that she had not bothered to tell him so. At the manifest table, the favoritism spread its roots deeper. Dietrich leaned over Fulmer and told him, quietly, to resort the standby list, to move a second coordinated rider up, a man who had helped with logistics, which everyone within earshot understood to mean something that had changed hands. Fulmer's jaw worked. He knew what he was being asked to do. He did it, and hated the doing of it. And the hate of it was the first small seed of something better that had not yet decided to grow. Traeger watched the whole circus from the ramp, and what he noticed wasn't the laughter. It was the notebook. He saw her write, and he saw what she wrote toward. Seat numbers, not grievances. Times, not tears. She was not keeping a record of how they had hurt her feelings. She was building a case. He had seen exactly one kind of person keep a book like that in a place like this, and none of them had ever been a contractor. If you have ever watched someone quietly do the right thing while louder people mocked them for it, and felt that clean, cold anger rise in your chest, then stay with honor tales. The quiet ones are the whole reason we tell these stories, and this one is only beginning to turn. The men laughed, and the woman wrote down the time, and the aircraft turned, and 800 meters out the tree line said nothing at all. By the time the last light of the afternoon began to slant, Dietrich had stopped joking and started writing, and writing was worse. Mockery is loud and stupid and passes. Paper is quiet and it lasts, and Dietrich understood, in the animal part of him that guarded his little kingdom, that to guarantee the last seats for his paying riders, he needed the manifest itself to lie for him. So he made it lie. He took a cluster of legitimate evacuees, real people with real slots, and moved them on the roster to a later serial, a follow-on flight that both he and every soldier on that pad knew was not coming. There was no later serial. There was this aircraft, and then there was the enemy. But on paper, the bumped families now had somewhere to be, and the seats they vacated now had somewhere to go. And beside the name he had already struck once, he wrote 3 new words. Hold for screening. It was clean. It was procedural. It weaponized her own cover against her, and he said as much, loud enough for his people to absorb the logic and repeat it later if anyone asked. No sponsor. No orders. No verifiable ID. She waits. That's not personal. That's procedure. No sponsor. No orders. No seat. It sounded like a man following the rules. It was theft of a seat dressed in the uniform of the rules, and Ashford read exactly what he had done in a single glance at the board. She could see a manifest the way she read a weight and balance card, the whole load at once, where the numbers were carried and where they had been faked to make the total close. She saw the phantom serial. She saw her own 3 words. She said nothing. Not yet. The moment was not hers to take. It was his to give away, and he was not finished giving. Traeger, uneasy now in a way he could not put down, drifted over to her during a lull and asked the only question he could think to ask. You got somewhere you need to be, ma'am? Anybody expecting you? She did not answer it the way a stranded person answers. No worry, no self-pity, no bid for his help. Her eyes moved across the wire and the tree line as she spoke, still scanning, still counting, and what she said wasn't about herself at all. I'm where I need to be. Get your bird loaded right, and I don't care where I sit. Get your bird loaded right. He heard it. She had said your bird the way a person says it, who has stood on 100 ramps and cared about exactly one thing on all of them: that the aircraft leaves correct, that the souls aboard match the souls that should be aboard, that no one who should fly gets left. She did not care about her seat. She cared about his load. And Traeger walked away from that exchange more certain than ever that he was standing next to something he did not understand. At the manifest table, the honest count went into a drawer. Fulmer had done the real tally, the true head count, the real slots, the legitimate order of the standby line, and it did not match the board Dietrich was now showing the tower. The clerk stood holding two versions of the truth in his two hands, the paper one and the real one, and the major leaned on him with the full weight of 4 grades and a hard stare, and told him the board was the board. Fulmer folded. He slid the honest manifest into the drawer under the table and closed it, and the closing of that drawer was the quietest, ugliest sound on the pad, and only he heard it. The stakes sharpened then in a way that was no longer about anyone's feelings, because Dietrich's arithmetic only closed if a real body came off the aircraft. And the easiest real body to come off, the one nobody would fight for if it were framed as procedure, as triage, as a hard necessary call, was the wounded soldier on the litter near the ramp. A young man with a leg splinted from hip to ankle and a bag of fluid running into his arm, marked now in Dietrich's hand, with a single word that should never have touched him: stand by. Ashford saw the whole shape of it before the ink was dry. She read the board once, top to bottom, the way she read a weight and balance card, and the fraud stood out to her as plainly as a bad number in a good column. She saw the family shunted onto a flight that would never come. She saw the 2 seats held open in the middle rows for men who had paid for them. She saw the litter marked standby to make the arithmetic close, and she understood exactly how much a wounded man's life was worth to Cole Dietrich, which was the price of one bartered seat. She wrote it all down. Times, seat numbers, the phantom serial's designation, the word standby beside a soldier's name. She did not raise her voice. The record was the record. Ashford saw that word too. She crossed to the litter without hurry, crouched, checked the young man's line where it ran into his arm, adjusted the flow, said something low that made his shoulders come down half an inch. She did not tell him he had been marked. She told him he was getting on the aircraft. She said it like a fact she personally controlled, and for the length of that sentence, he believed it and rested. So the board now said the woman was a security hold, and the wounded man was a standby. The phantom serial swallowed families who would never see it. 2 coordinated riders sat 1 row from freedom, and the single document that could prove all of it a lie sat folded in a drawer under the manifest table, held shut by a 20-year-old who had not yet found the thing in himself that would open it again. Traeger had stopped watching and started checking. He was a flight engineer, and flight engineers do not run on feelings. They run on verification, and everything about this woman had crossed the line from odd into something he needed to close out before wheels up. So he did it the quiet way. He pulled his own honest head count off the ramp, the cruise count, the count that only cared about souls and seats and did not care whose favor rode where. Then he walked it against Dietrich's board. The numbers did not match. He stood there in the noise and read the mismatch the way you read a gauge that is telling you something is about to break. He found the later serial, and knew in his gut there was no later serial. He found the litter patient marked standby and felt something cold slide down his spine, because you do not mark a litter patient standby on the last bird out unless you have decided a wounded man is a line item. Somebody had done arithmetic here with human beings as the variables, and it was not the quiet woman. She had spent the whole day trying to make his load correct. The board was trying to make it wrong. Then he tried to place her and could not, and the failure told him everything. He ran it in his head, every tell, stacked up. The weight and balance to the decimal, delivered before the crew closed it out. The tree line call before the tower. The way she set herself one pace inside the tail rotor arc, without being told, and never drifted out of it. The comfort of her back to a running aircraft. The brevity. Souls over max gross downwind chalk. The vocabulary of someone who had not learned those words from a briefing, but earned them in a seat. He laid it all next to the word contractor, and the word contractor fell apart in his hands. "That's not a civilian," he said, to the loadmaster, to himself, to the turning rotor. "That's somebody who's done this for real." He carried it as far as he dared. On the command net, low, careful, he raised it with an old friend on the Joint Task Force staff, a chief he trusted, someone with reach into the parts of the base a flight engineer could not see. He did not use her description as a joke. He described what he was seeing. A woman in civilian clothes who read aircraft like aircrew, who would not say who she was, who was being papered off the last bird by his movement control officer. He asked the question sideways. Should he push it? Should he just load his aircraft and go? The answer came back guarded, and it changed the shape of the whole afternoon. "Listen to me. If she's standing on your pad, and she won't say who she is, you do not push her off a bird. You keep her exactly where she is, and you find out who's coming for her. People like that don't turn up alone, and they don't turn up by accident. Whatever your major thinks he's running down there, tell him to stop." Traeger turned the words over and found they fit every fact he had. People like that don't turn up alone. He thought about the way she had called the approach road before the tower, and how a person only earns that kind of eye by needing it, once on a day that nearly killed them. He thought about the canvas bag she never let more than a boot's length from her feet, and wondered what a woman like that carried in a bag like that. Whatever it was not a contractor's laptop. Traeger stood with that in his ear and finally understood the geometry of his own pad. The danger was not the quiet woman. The quiet woman was the safest thing out here. The danger was the major with the clipboard, who kept trying to leave her behind. Because whatever the woman was, she had friends the size of the sky, and Dietrich was building a case against himself with every stroke of his pen. Ashford, through all of it, did the work. The litter patient's oxygen had drifted. She rechecked it, reset it, kept the young man from feeling the fear that would have spiked his pulse. She still had not pulled rank. She would not. Traeger understood now that she was never going to, that the not pulling was not modesty but a rule of some kind, iron and old, and that whatever had forged that rule had cost her more than any of them could guess. The reveal is coming, who she is, and what she did to earn a silence this deep. If you want to be here when the pad finally learns what one flight engineer already knows, subscribe to Honor Tales now, because the next part is the one the whole story turns on. Traeger keyed off the net, looked down the ramp at the woman standing quiet in the wash, and for the first time all day, he was not confused. He was afraid. For Dietrich. Here is what the base did not know in the last still minutes before the final lift. She sat apart now, in the blue shade of a revetment, on an empty ammunition crate, the canvas bag standing upright between her boots. For the first time all day she was not moving, and for the only time in this whole account, the noise falls away, and we are led inside. She was thinking about a worse pad than this one, 15 years back and half a world east, on a hilltop that was coming apart under her. Then, Captain Vivian Ashford, 31 years old, Air Mission Commander, had flown into a collapsing position, run after run after run, into fire that walked across the landing zone like rain moving over water. The rule she flew by was not written in any manual. It was the only thing she had ever truly believed. Everyone else flies first. The wounded first, the youngest first, the frightened first, and the pilot who can always squeeze one more soul aboard goes last every time, because she can, because the aircraft is hers, and the arithmetic is hers to pay. She had loaded other people onto helicopters ahead of herself so many times that it had stopped being a decision and become the shape of who she was. The men on this modern pad had mocked her for standing last in line. Standing last in line was the truest thing about her, and she had earned the right to it on a day that took everything. She made run after run until there was almost nothing left to fly, and then she went back one last time, because there were still men on that hill, and going back was not in question. It was never in question. That was the point of her. On that last run, in the seat beside her, Chief Warrant Officer 2 Josiah Wren, 29 years old, the best hand she had ever flown next to, a man who laughed at exactly the wrong moments, and was right to, took the round that was meant for both of them. He was gone before the aircraft cleared the ridge. She flew it out one-handed, her other hand pressed useless against a friend who could not be helped. 11 living men in the back. And she did not put the aircraft down, and she did not come apart, because 11 men were breathing behind her, and the breathing was her job. She landed clean. She always landed clean. And then, only then, in the dark at the edge of the field, she let go for the length of time it takes to let go, and picked it back up, because the next load was waiting. Among the wounded, she had carried off that hill on one of those runs, was the ground battalion commander whose element she was extracting, Lieutenant Colonel Ellis Cothran, 40 years old, gut-shot and gray, and certain he was going to die on that ridge. He would have. She put him on the aircraft ahead of men she outranked and men she loved, because that was the order the rule demanded, and then she went back for the others. He lived because a captain no one was looking at decided the arithmetic and paid it. For that day, a grateful and horrified country hung the Medal of Honor around her neck. She had stood through the ceremony the way she stood through everything, still and correct, and then she had put the ribbon in a bag. It lived there now. In the canvas bag between her boots, wrapped in a spare sock, was the highest honor the nation gives, and it had never once been on the jacket. She did not wear it because wearing it felt like sending Wren a bill for his life, and she would not do that. Not ever. She had a rule, and she had kept it on a worse day than this one. Everyone else flies first. She flies last. That is not humility. It is arithmetic she has already paid for, in full, once, and she has never asked for change. And here is the thing the pad could not know, the thing the narrator sets down cold, because it is about to matter more than anything Dietrich has written all day. The final lift today was being commanded from the very top. The Joint Task Force commander himself intended to be the last man on the last bird, to stand on the ramp until every soul was aboard, and only then step on, because that was the kind of officer he had become, and he had become it on a hilltop 15 years ago in the back of a shaking aircraft, watching a young captain fly him to safety with a dead man in the seat beside her. The ribbon is in the bag. It has never once been on the jacket. She stood. She lifted the canvas bag to her shoulder, settled it, and walked back toward the ramp and the noise and the small, cruel man with the clipboard, unhurried, last in line by her own iron choosing. The most decorated person on the base, carrying the nation's highest honor in a sock, walking calmly back toward the seat she would never claim, while a mile of dust away, the man she had carried off a hilltop rolled toward this pad to be the last man on the last bird. The trap was closing, and only the audience could hear it click. To make his rigged manifest close, Dietrich finally crossed the one line no paper could dress up. The final lift spun to life. The rotors came up to speed. The wash flattened the crowd's clothes against their bodies, and the count came up short by exactly one. One seat. One body too many for the load he had faked into place. And Dietrich, standing at the ramp with his clipboard and his two coordinated riders waiting, made his choice out loud, in the language of a man who has decided cruelty is a procedure. The litter came off, the wounded soldier, the young man with the splinted leg, and the line in his arm, the one Ashford had steadied twice, was pulled from the aircraft and set on the matting, marked standby, to free the seat for the second, paying rider. Dietrich framed it as triage, as a hard medical call, as the sort of decision someone had to make. He was not qualified to make it. No one had asked him to make it. He made it anyway, because the arithmetic only closed if a real man came off, and a wounded man could not argue. This was the bright line. Not mockery, not a doctored serial, not a phantom flight. This was a litter casualty pulled off the last aircraft out of a war so that a seat could be sold. This was documentable. This was probable cause. This was the act that no investigation on Earth would ever wave through, and every experienced person on that pad felt the temperature of the day change the instant it happened. Fulmer froze over the clipboard, the pen dead in his hand. Traeger came off the ramp and started toward the litter, his jaw set. Ashford did not stop it. She stood 3 feet away and let it happen. Deliberately. Because she understood, with the cold clarity of a person who reads whole manifests at a glance, that this was the act that ended him. That a bumped litter patient was the one thing that would burn his little kingdom to the ground and salt it. And because the man who would end it was 30 seconds out, dust rising off his convoy on the approach road. She had timed that plume too. She let Dietrich finish building the case against himself, because a case only stands if the man completes the crime, and she was not going to reach in and save him from the last brick. Then she stepped to the litter. She crouched, took the young soldier's hand where it lay on his chest, steadied his fluid line, and looked him in the eyes. "You're getting on this aircraft," she told him. "I promise you that. Stay with me." And then she stood and turned to Dietrich, and for the first time in the entire day, her face changed. It wasn't anger. It was almost gentle. It was the smile of a person watching someone dig the last shovelful of their own grave and hand up the shovel. "Go ahead, Major," she said. "Take him off. Put your name on it." The young soldier on the litter gripped her hand once, hard, and let go, and she felt him choose to trust her, which was the only thing she had ever asked of anyone she was about to carry. She held his eyes until she was sure he was steady. Then she rose, unhurried, and there was nothing hurried in her at all, because a person who has already done the arithmetic does not need to rush the answer. Dietrich was rattled by that smile in a way he could not have explained. It was wrong. The clipboard lady was supposed to be beaten. Beaten people did not smile like that. Patient, certain, almost kind. For half a second, something in him wanted to reverse, to put the litter back, to walk it off the ledge. But he was committed, and small men who are committed keep going, because going back means admitting there was a wrong turn, and admitting that was the one thing he could not do. "It's a hard call," he said to the crowd, to Fulmer, to himself. Somebody has to make it. He signed the bump. His pen went across the line and put his name on the act, in ink, on the manifest, in front of Traeger and Fulmer and 40 frightened witnesses. Fulmer watched him do it and felt the drawer under the table burning a hole in the back of his mind. The honest count folded in the dark, waiting. There were witnesses now. There was a signature now. The only thing still missing was someone with the rank to act on all of it. That someone was arriving. A vehicle and a security element rolled onto the pad ahead of the final lift, tires crunching, dust trailing. Dietrich straightened, brushed his front, arranged his face. A VIP, someone important, come to watch the last bird out, come to be impressed by the officer who ran a tight flight line under pressure. He was already composing the sentence he would say. He smiled toward the staff car, certain, absolutely certain, that his day was about to improve. The wounded soldier lay on the matting where he had been set down, and Ashford stood beside him with her hand on his shoulder, watching the car, and she was not smiling now. She was still. Major General Ellis Cothran stepped out onto the pad, cleared his security element with a hand, and scanned the ground out of 15 years of habit, and froze on the woman standing beside a litter that had no business being on the matting. He knew that face. He had seen it upside down and sideways and through a haze of morphine and smoke, from the floor of a shaking aircraft 15 years ago, and he had seen it every day since in the part of himself that remembered he was supposed to be dead. He forgot the pad. He forgot the last bird. He walked, and he walked past Major Cole Dietrich, who had already opened his mouth, who was already mid-sentence with his prepared line about a tight flight line under pressure. And the general went by him as if he were a piece of ground equipment. Confusion crossed Dietrich's face first. Why was the two-star walking past him? Why was he walking toward the clipboard lady? Cothran stopped in front of her, and he said her name in the open, in the clear, loud enough for the whole pad to hear over the rotors. Colonel Ashford. The pad stopped. Every soldier who heard it turned. Colonel. The word went through the crowd like a current. Disbelief broke across Dietrich's face. The civilian, the clipboard lady, the woman he had hauled out of line by the sleeve and papered off the manifest as a security hold, was a colonel, was an 06, outranked him by 2 full grades, and had stood there all day and let him. Traeger, at the ramp, let out a long breath he felt like he had been holding since 0600. He had been right. He had been right about all of it. Then the general did the thing that turned disbelief into horror. Major General Ellis Cothran, a 2-star, came to attention in front of a colonel and rendered her honors. And he said it plainly, so no one on the pad could pretend not to understand. 15 years ago, this officer flew me off a hill I was going to die on. She went back for the others. She lost her co-pilot doing it. She wears the Medal of Honor, though you will never once catch her wearing it. Every man here will render her the honor she has never asked for. Nobody on the pad moved. The rotors beat overhead, and the heat stood up off the matting, and 40 frightened people watched a 2-star general hold himself at attention in front of a woman in a plain travel jacket with a canvas bag on her shoulder. It did not compute, and then all at once it did, and the computing of it ran across the crowd face by face, like light coming up over a ridge. The soldier who had nudged her bag with his boot went pale. The clerk, who had hidden her honest count in a drawer, felt the floor tilt. And the woman herself stood through the honors, the way she had stood through everything that day, still and correct and unbearably patient, as if being recognized were simply one more thing to be endured with grace. Recognition arrived on Dietrich's face, and then horror right behind it, as the full arithmetic of his day assembled itself in front of him. The woman he had mocked to steady his frightened soldiers. The seat he had sold out from under a Medal of Honor recipient. The litter he had signed off the aircraft while she stood 3 feet away and let him put his name on it. "Colonel Ashford," Cawthron said, turning it now toward the whole pad, "you will not stand on my pad while my last bird leaves without you." He ordered his own seat given to her, and when Dietrich stammered, "The manifest, sir," there was a screening hold. There were procedures. Cawthron read the pad in one sweep, the way she read it, the way real ones do. The litter on the matting, the phantom cereal on the board, the 2 coordinated riders sitting where families should have been, the drawer. He took it all in one look, and he relieved Major Cole Dietrich on the spot and told the security element to hold him. The wounded soldier went back onto the aircraft, lifted gently, his fluid line running clean. Dietrich was drawn back off the pad, detained, pulled from his own manifest, and Ashford, unmasked at last, finally spoke as who she was, not to gloat, never that, but to fix the load. Briefly, correctly. Litter first, then the children, then the walking wounded. Fill from the front. The soldiers moved to her voice without being told, because they knew now who had been standing among them all day, and the salute that went across that pad was not ordered by anyone. It rose on its own, hand after hand, from men and women who understood, finally and completely, that the quiet woman with the canvas bag had been the finest soldier on the field the entire time, and none of them had bothered to look. The scheme came apart in minutes, the way rotten things do once the first board is pulled. Fulmer moved first. The 20-year-old clerk pulled the drawer, took out the honest head count he had hidden for a man who had never deserved the loyalty, and walked it to the general with his hands shaking and his chin up. He did not have to be asked. That was the whole of it. He wasn't asked. He chose. The real manifest, the true standby order, the legitimate families Dietrich had swept into a serial that did not exist. All of it, in a boy's careful handwriting, handed over freely. The redemption was small, and it was complete. Cawthron took it, read it, and looked at the young man for a moment longer than the paper required. And what passed between them was the only thing worth having on a day like that, which was the knowledge that Fulmer had turned out to be honest after all. What followed was consequence, not spectacle. Dietrich was not thrown off a roof or paraded in chains. He was relieved and detained, and the investigation was named and real and would grind forward the way those things do, with the signed bump and the doctored board and the witnesses and the boy's honest manifest all waiting in the file. The coordinated riders were offloaded quietly and set down on the matting to answer for what they had paid for. The legitimate evacuees came off the phantom serial and back onto the aircraft where they had always belonged. The litter patient was aboard, secure, his line clean. Traeger walked the load one last time and got the aircraft right. Souls matching seats, weight inside its numbers, everything the way she had spent all day trying to make it. And Dietrich, the man who had bumped a wounded soldier to sell a seat, was left to wait on the pad he thought he owned, for a later lift, unable to bump a single soul to get himself aboard 1 second faster. The ground he had ruled all day would not give him so much as a place in line. If you have ever waited a long time to see the right thing finally happen, to see the quiet, decent person get their due and the loud one answer for it, then you already know why these stories matter and why we tell them. Subscribe to Honor Tales and stay to the end, because the last minute of this one is the reason for all the rest. Then the gesture completed itself, the way it was always going to. Ashford loaded the aircraft the way she had loaded every aircraft in her life. The mother and the 2 children, the little girl she had promised, walked to the ramp herself, hand in hand, exactly as she had said she would. The litter, secured. The limping soldier steadied up the ramp with a hand between his shoulders. every soul aboard, and herself standing on the matting, last, the way she was always going to stand last, because the rule was iron, and the rule was her. And Major General Ellis Cawthron, who owed her his life and had spent 15 years learning to be the kind of man who stood last on a ramp, refused to let the rule cost her one more time. He took the ramp jump seat himself, the last, worst, most exposed position on the aircraft, and gave her the seat. He gestured to it, and when she hesitated, because of course she hesitated, he said the only thing that could have moved her. "You put me on the bird first once, Colonel. Sit down. My turn." She sat, for the first time in a day, in 15 years, in a life built entirely around going last. Vivian Ashford took the seat someone else insisted on giving her. The ramp came up. The Chinook lifted, nose down, dust boiling gold in the low sun, and the base she had come forward to see out with her own eyes fell away beneath them. Empty now. Everyone who should have been carried. From the ramp, on his gunner's belt, Sergeant First Class Gideon Traeger looked at the woman he had spent all day failing to figure out, and rendered one last quiet salute. And she returned it. And that was enough. As they climbed out over the wire and the dark line of the trees, Cawthron leaned toward her over the noise and told her where she was going next. Not home. She was never going home while there was a pad that needed her. The Meridian Corridor drawdown, another collapsing line, another impossible field, another command that had asked for her by name, because commands that had one bad day coming always seemed to know to ask for her. A quiet forward line, one more load to get right. She nodded and looked out the ramp at the country falling away, and somewhere in the canvas bag between her boots, the ribbon rode where it always rode, in a sock, unworn, paid for in full. Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to Honor Tales for more.